The cameras were rolling. The audience was silent. And then Dr. Phil did something no one expected. He stopped everything, mid-sentence, mid-breath. The entire production froze as a mother sitting across from him whispered 7 words that weren't in any script, any plan, any preparation. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, and in that moment, the studio didn't just witness a confession, they witnessed a breaking point. What she said next would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone in that room. And Dr. Phil, for the first time in decades of hosting, couldn't hide what he was feeling. If you want to know what happened when the cameras stopped and the real conversation began, subscribe now, because what comes next will leave you speechless. Her name was Karen, 43 years old, mother of 2, and from the outside, her life looked ordinary. But behind closed doors, she was drowning. Debt collectors called every morning. Her marriage was falling apart. Her teenage son hadn't spoken to her in 6 months. And worst of all, she didn't know why. That's what brought her to Dr. Phil's stage, a desperate search for answers she couldn't find on her own. The show had started like any other. Dr. Phil welcomed her warmly, asked the opening questions, got her comfortable. The audience listened as Karen described her struggles, the financial pressure, the emotional distance from her family, the overwhelming sense that she was failing as a mother. It was painful, yes, but it was also familiar territory for the show. Dr. Phil nodded, asked follow-ups, guided the conversation with his trademark blend of empathy and directness. But then something shifted. Dr. Phil asked a simple question. Karen, when did you start feeling like you weren't enough? It was meant to be a stepping stone, a way to dig deeper into her self-perception. But instead of answering, Karen went silent, completely silent. Her eyes dropped to her lap, her breathing became shallow. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the cameraman exchanged glances. Dr. Phil leaned forward. The room held its breath. And that's when Karen said it, the sentence that would stop the show cold. I think I've been running from something I did a long time ago, she whispered, barely audible. And I don't know if I can say it out loud. Dr. Phil's expression changed instantly. The practiced calm gave way to something deeper. Concern mixed with resolve. He didn't respond right away. He just held her gaze, letting her know that whatever was coming, she wasn't alone. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The audience didn't dare move. The crew stood frozen behind their equipment. Then Dr. Phil spoke, his voice quieter than usual, but firm. Karen, whatever it is, you're safe here. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Karen's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Tears began streaming down her face, and then, in a voice so small it almost disappeared, she said, I gave up my first daughter for adoption when I was 17, and I never told my family, not my husband, not my kids, no one. The studio erupted, not with sound, but with a collective intake of breath so sharp it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Dr. Phil didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He just let the weight of that truth settle. Because he understood something most people don't. The most powerful moments in therapy aren't the ones filled with words. They're the ones filled with silence that finally breaks after decades. Karen continued, her voice shaking. I was so ashamed. I thought if anyone knew, they'd see me differently. They'd think I was a bad person, a bad mother. So I buried it. And I've been burying it for 26 years. Dr. Phil closed his eyes briefly, processing what he'd just heard. When he opened them again, there was something different in his demeanor. Something beyond the TV host, beyond the psychologist. It was humanity, raw and unfiltered. He stood up. The audience gasped quietly. Dr. Phil never stood up mid-segment unless something had shifted fundamentally. He walked over to Karen's chair, knelt down beside her so they were at a level, and said, "Stop the tape." The director in the control booth hesitated. Dr. Phil rarely gave that command, but he repeated it louder this time, his voice carrying across the studio. "Stop the tape now!" The red recording lights blinked off. The camera stopped rolling, and for the first time in the history of that show, what happened next was just between Dr. Phil, Karen, and the people in that room. Subscribe and leave a comment because what comes next is the most powerful part of this story. What happened off camera would later be described by crew members as one of the most profound moments they'd ever witnessed. Dr. Phil stayed kneeling beside Karen, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He didn't rush her, he didn't push for more. He just stayed present, letting her know that this space, this moment, was hers to control. Karen's tears turned into sobs, not the kind you perform for a camera, but the kind that come from a place so deep they've been locked away for decades. Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief, not a tissue from the box on the table, but his own personal one. He handed it to her, without a word. "I dream about her," Karen finally said, her voice. "Every single night for 26 years, I dream about her. I wonder if she's happy, if she's loved, if she hates me for giving her away." Dr. Phil's jaw tightened. Those who knew him well could see it, the way he processed pain, not just as a therapist, but as a father himself. "Karen," he said, slowly, deliberately, "you didn't give her away. You gave her a chance. There's a difference, and you need to hear that." Karen shook her head violently. "But I never looked back. I never tried to find her. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind who was 17, scared, and doing the best she could with the resources she had," Dr. Phil replied, his voice unwavering. "You were a child yourself, and you've been punishing yourself ever since for a decision that took more courage than most people will ever have to summon in their entire lives." The audience was still silent, but you could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was therapy in its purest form. Two people, stripped of pretense, confronting a truth that had been festering for more than 2 decades. Dr. Phil stood up and returned to his chair. He looked toward the control booth and gave a slight nod. The cameras came back on, but something had fundamentally changed. When Dr. Phil spoke again, it wasn't to the audience at home. It was to Karen, but also to every person who had ever carried a secret so heavy it threatened to crush them. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," he said, his tone gentle but unshakable. "What you just shared took more strength than you realize, and I know you think it makes you weak or broken or unworthy, but I'm telling you right now it doesn't. It makes you human." Karen looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "How do I live with this? How do I tell my family?" Dr. Phil leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together. "One step at a time. And the first step is forgiving yourself for being 17 and terrified. The second step is understanding that secrets don't protect the people we love. They isolate us from them. And the third step, well, that's where we're going to need some help." He reached down beside his chair and pulled out a white envelope. The audience leaned forward, confused. Karen's hand flew to her mouth. "You didn't."
"We did," Dr. Phil confirmed. "And we found her." The studio erupted, not with applause, but with gasps, with tears, with a collective emotional release that shook the very foundations of the room. Karen couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. Dr. Phil held up the envelope. "Her name is Emily. She's 26 years old. She's a teacher, and she's been looking for you for the last 3 years." The tears that came next weren't from Karen alone. They were from the audience, from the crew, even from Dr. Phil himself, whose eyes glistened as he watched a mother receive the one piece of information she'd been too afraid to seek for over 2 decades. "She wants to meet you," Dr. Phil said softly. "If you're ready." Karen nodded, unable to form words. Dr. Phil handed her the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Emily. Pages and pages of words that Karen had waited 26 years to read. But Dr. Phil wasn't done. He looked directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall in a way he rarely did. To everyone watching this at home, if you're carrying something that's eating you alive, if you're holding on to a secret that's destroying you from the inside out, I want you to hear this. You are not defined by the worst decision you ever made. You are defined by what you do next. He turned back to Karen. "We're going to set up a meeting between you and Emily. We're going to have a licensed therapist present. We're going to do this the right way." But Karen, the hardest part is already over. You said it out loud, and that's where healing begins. The show ended with Karen clutching that letter like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. Dr. Phil stood, walked over to her one more time, and placed both hands on her shoulders. "You're going to be okay," he said quietly, "and so is she." 3 months later, Karen and Emily met face-to-face for the first time since the day Emily was born. The reunion was private, facilitated by a trauma-informed therapist, and it was everything Karen had dreamed of, and nothing she expected. Emily didn't hate her. She didn't resent her. She understood. And more than that, she was grateful for the life she'd been given, for the family who raised her, and for the mother who loved her enough to let her go. Dr. Phil attended that reunion not as a host or a psychologist, but as a witness to the kind of healing most people never get to see. Afterward, he shared a statement with his team. "This is why we do this work. Not for the ratings, not for the drama, but for moments like this, when someone finally stops running and starts living." Karen's story became one of the most talked about episodes in the show's history. Not because of shock value, not because of spectacle, but because it reminded people of something they'd forgotten. That redemption is possible, that forgiveness is real, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. The white envelope, the one that held Emily's letter, sits in Karen's bedroom to this day. She doesn't need to open it anymore. She's memorized every word. But she keeps it there as a reminder that the past doesn't have to define the future, that secrets lose their power when brought into the light, and that sometimes all it takes is one person, someone like Dr. Phil, to believe in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. But there's more to this story that most people don't know. In the weeks following that episode, Karen's husband sat down with her and heard the truth for the first time. He didn't react with anger or betrayal. He reacted with understanding. "I always knew something was weighing on you," he told her quietly. "I just didn't know what, and I didn't know how to ask." Their marriage, which had been crumbling under the weight of unspoken pain, began to heal. Not overnight, not easily, but authentically. Her son, the one who hadn't spoken to her in 6 months, watched the episode online. He called her the next day. Through tears, he told her something she hadn't expected. "Mom, I've been angry at you my whole life, and I never knew why. Now I understand. You were carrying something so heavy, and it leaked into everything. I'm not mad anymore. I just want you back." Karen's transformation became a case study in Dr. Phil's ongoing work on the psychology of secrets and shame. He later referenced her story in multiple episodes, always with her permission, always with respect. "Karen taught me something I thought I already knew," Dr. Phil said in a follow-up segment. "She reminded me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway." The reunion between Karen and Emily wasn't a single moment. It became an ongoing relationship. They meet for coffee once a month now. They text each other funny memes. Emily calls Karen by her first name, not Mom. And that's okay. They're building something new, something that doesn't erase the past, but doesn't let the future dictate the future either. And Dr. Phil? He keeps a photo from that day in his office. Not the one from the stage, but one taken backstage after the camera stopped rolling. Karen and Emily hugging for the first time, with Dr. Phil standing off to the side, smiling quietly. It's a reminder of why he does this work, even after all these years.